Traveling the Vortex.
We've joined the Brigadier as he investigates a spooky doll in episode 377. I'm Keith.
That synopsis does not do this book justice.
Good thing that's not my synopsis.
Oh, okay. That opening doesn't do this book justice either.
His synopsis is that the Lethbridge-Stewart investigates a creepy doll.
I don't want to tip my hat or spoil it early for the listeners, but there's a little bit more going on in the book than
There's quite a bit
just
more
that.
than that.
I'm Sean.
I'm Glenn.
How are you guys?
A little slap happy.
Oh, I'm tickled now. That's that open. I don't know what I was expecting, but it was just fun.
I didn't know what I was going to do until it happened, so I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Well, I won't say that was obvious then.
We joined Lethbridge-Stewart and a creature and a pit. That too is accurate.
The open was quite accurate. He does investigate a creepy doll. It just happens to be a little more
thrust
too.
of the
And I mean, don't get me wrong.
It is creepy.
It is creepy.
That's what brings him there.
Yeah.
It is a legitimately creepy doll.
You said spooky though, didn't you?
Spooky, creepy, whatever.
Synonyms.
No. What are you guys doing this week? Anything?
Well, we went and saw Ready Player One.
Hey, what'd you think?
I thought it was good. It wasn't fantastic. It wasn't the level of the book. Sarah was really disappointed with it because of how much they changed.
Did she read the book, or did you read
she
it to
did.
her?
I understood the changes they made and was okay with it, and I liked some stuff, but was surprised at a bit more depth to the film than there was to the book. We also watched The Mountain Between Us.
What'd you think of that one?
Which was pretty good. It was a little different than I expected. I also kind of watched it, trying to think of, okay, what's going to be the big twist going on, and there wasn't one. So it was pretty straightforward, but enjoyable.
Oh, there was a mountain.
There was literally a mountain between them. Well, not really between them, but, with them. Title doesn't quite make sense. And the only other thing I did was I listened to the first Doctor Adventures from Big Finish. That's the David Bradley one, which was pretty good. The stories were good. The performances, they're not spot on interpretation or impersonations of the roles, but they do a pretty decent job.
I don't know if I mentioned this last week, but the week before we actually went and saw Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle.
What did you think?
I was quite pleased that it's a sequel. You had mentioned that, but picks right up basically where it left off, although Caitlin made a point that they were in some foreign country when it washed up on the beach at the end. But I said, well, yeah, but maybe somebody just tossed it back in the ocean and it washed up somewhere else. So I said at least they acknowledged the fact that it came from the board game. So,
Did you do anything, Sean?
Yeah, we went and saw. What did we see this week? We went to we saw Love, Simon, which was really pretty good. It's a coming of age and coming out story, but it was very good. It was enjoyable, and we saw a couple others. I don't remember now what they were. They all start to blend together after a while. Have you seen the second Solo trailer?
yes, my gosh. I have been lukewarm on this film all along until I watched that trailer and I went, dang you, Lucasfilm.
I'm still trepidatious about it.
I
I have a few just continuity concerns more than anything else.
I'm angry. I've said all along I don't need a young Han movie because there's no amount of peril you can put him in. I'm like, oh, look, here's Chewie hanging off the edge of this train, and here comes a big rock. I'm not concerned. I know he makes it out of this. But I'm angry because, like you, I've been so lukewarm, hot. And this trailer came out, and I was like, oh, damn it, that looks really good.
Anything else?
I don't think so.
All right, let's move on to news.
Well, in our news, Titan Comics has announced The Road to the 13th Doctor.
Ooh.
What's that about?
Which is going to be a 3-part comic series leading up to their 13th Doctor comic line starting. So both 10, 11, and 12 will have comics released supposedly with a 13th Doctor theme somehow. At least they're bannering it as the Road to the 13th Doctor. There's not a lot of details about what each issue is about or how it will tie into the 13th Doctor.
I hope she doesn't show up because it goes against what we've been talking about.
Right.
The trend is going towards, multi-Doctor stories were event stories. And it seems like while Titan is inventing events every year just to do something like this, if they do that, then that's outside of the event. And we've already done some of that crossover outside of the event.
Looking at this in more detail, I don't know if that will happen.
Okay.
Because it looks like each issue also contains a serialized short story from the creative team behind the new 13th Doctor ongoing comic series.
Uh-huh.
So we might get short little 13th Doctor stories in addition to...
Okay. I might be all right with that then.
It sounded like a really cool idea when you first said it, and then I thought about it and went, wait a minute. We've already been on the road to the 13th Doctor. It's called the 12th Doctor.
It's from one, we've been on the road to the 13th Doctor.
Now, if the little vignettes are like Barcelona, like if it's one of those little segments that they did with David Tennant after he first regenerated.
Oh, yeah.
And he was just in the TARDIS before the episode picked up on the... Okay, I'd be down with that, but...
Depends on how they're going to do
Yeah,
things.
it depends on how they're doing it. I'm with you. I
What
don't want a crossover yet.
Time will tell.
I see what you did there.
Our other bit of news is the novelizations that we talked about not that long ago have been released, and reviews are coming out, and we're learning some snippets of some details added in to some of the stories from the authors, including Stephen Moffat making the Peter Cushing movies into canon, with them being movies in the Doctor Who universe.
Which we discussed before when we learned that he wanted to put that in the Day of the Doctor television episode and wasn't able to do it because of rights issues or whatever. And so it wasn't a surprise to me that he did it, but it's a delight that he's done it in the novelization.
Yeah, I would agree. And then the other thing, well, so there's
this is the one that's catching a lot of flack.
There's also in Day of the Doctor a nice mention that the Doctor was friends with Cushing.
Oh yeah.
Did you see that?
Yeah.
And
that to me is the best part of it.
He took him forward in time, and he was able to appear in other films after his death.
Yeah, I thought that
meaning
was
Rogue One.
I thought that was a little.
Dude, Peter Cushing cameoed in a sci-fi film.
That was a little cheeky, but
I like that part.
Well, I like it because it also establishes that Star Wars exists in the Doctor Who universe, so that makes me happy.
The movies,
Yes.
We knew that, though.
Well, yeah, because I wrote the Cyberman Bob story with a lightsaber, so I'd already done it, but I guess if Moffat wants to come along and do it.
They've mentioned Star Wars.
They mentioned Star Trek.
They've mentioned Star Trek. I don't think they've ever mentioned Star Wars.
I don't think they mentioned Star Wars.
I'll come back to it. I'll recall it, because I remember, maybe it was the Star Trek.
Are you thinking of the Impossible
mind.
Astronaut, Day of the Moon, where she's talking about... That's a Star Trek mask thing, isn't it?
No. I'll think of it.
Okay.
No, I won't. RTD has also added some extra stuff in Rose, where he envisions future versions of the Doctor. So the passage says, Rose saw a man with a fantastic jaw, dressed in a tweed jacket and a bow tie. Then Clive kept the sequence going. An older, angry man in a brown caretaker's coat, holding a mop. A blonde woman in braces, running away from a giant frog in front of Buckingham Palace. Now that's a story I want to see.
Spoilers. If we get a frog episode next season, I'm going to be really upset.
A tall, bald, black woman wielding a flaming sword. A young girl or boy in a high-tech wheelchair with what looked like a robot dog at their side.
Why not?
Yeah, why not?
That's the one I think a lot of people are having issue with, because they're saying, and I don't know because I haven't actually read this, but they're saying that it implies that Rose would be familiar with the regeneration prior to the Doctor regenerating, which is such an impact on her storyline that she doesn't realize that this happens. And so by putting that in there, that implies that she would have...
Clive also say he doesn't always show up with the same face, and doesn't he point out that that's your doctor's face, right? Doesn't he?
He does say that. He does say that. But
so it's implied that he has different faces.
But she's just going on some crazy guy at that time who shows her 2 pictures of the same doctor that she's going to end up with. So I think it's all right there to imply that, because he's just inferring that I think he's shown up, or I've heard he shows up. He doesn't show her any proof of it. This is showing her proof of it, which should have at least applied to her when the doctor regenerates into 10, and she should have at least been implanted with the idea that this is a new face. She's taken off guard by that, and I think that kind of cheapens that moment in the series by doing
it. It can be implied that if the doctor is a title that's passed from person to person, that he shows up with a different face, that, you know, I can rationalize that one and write it off, because I think if it were me in that position, I would disregard that altogether and really be tripping over how is he standing on the deck of the Titanic?
Right.
You know, this is the guy.
This passage, we don't see, at least without the actual novelization here, we don't see what Rose's reaction to these other pictures are.
Right.
If she disregards them, or how she views these other pictures of him.
It's an RTD moment. He's being cheeky.
Yeah. And it's a novelization. It's not... If you go by the quote-unquote canon...
It's canon.
If it's not on TV... It's a novelization of a TV episode, so it's not the actual TV episode. They didn't re-edit the episode to put it in there, so it's technically not fully canon.
It's not a George Lucas special edition.
Right, exactly.
Steven Spielberg removing the guns from
as
E.T.
with any all Doctor Who canon, take what you want to accept as canon, ignore the rest.
Canon.
Pawn shot first. I remember that I had to go to Wiki to bring it back,
cheater.
but Clyde calls Luke his young Padawan in the Sarah Jane Adventures, which is in the same universe, and that's what I was thinking. I was thinking it was a reference to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
I'll
however, that being said, that's the TV link that I could find, but there's all kinds of links all through audio and books and video, or not video, Big Finish audio specifically. So. All right, shall we do our review?
That's a very private haunting. Brigadier Lethbridge-Stewart is not a man who likes to leave things unfinished. He is therefore at a loss when forced into taking leave after his recent tussle with a shadow creature, a case that is yet to be fully resolved. Anne Travers is tired of the loss burning in her heart, so when Lethbridge-Stewart is called to Glen Cross to help the son of an old friend, she insists on going with him. In Glen Cross, the young Thomas Campbell has gone missing, and his friends band together to uncover a dark secret at the heart of the village. Meanwhile, Arthur Penrose had returned to his ancestral home to find a haunted residence and a doll with a message. What connects the doll to the strange sounds that scurry around Penrose Manor? One of the adults of Glen Cross seems so intent on keeping their children from leaving the village. And what has all this got to do with the shadow creature? It is up to the Lethbridge-Stewart and Anne to find out.
Bum, bum, bum. I went into this with a marked lack of enthusiasm.
Why?
Because it's a very private haunting, which means it's a ghost story.
Would you rather it be a public haunting?
Yeah. Right off the bat, it's like, oh, we're doing the haunted house one. Okay. And you guys know how I feel about haunted house stories in Doctor Who. It's just like, well, here we go. And instead, we start with this shadow creature and a light gun. And I was like, ooh, that's cool. I mean, I don't know why, the visual of Lethbridge-Stewart brandishing a gigantic flashlight hooked up to a generator that these guys are hauling around the hospital. That excited me. I was so like, that is great. That's fantastic. Then we got into the haunting part with Arthur going home to the manor, and it kind of started to bog down for me. And I don't mean that the book was written poorly. I mean, it's just, for me, that's not a story arc that I'm terribly interested in. Until he took the doll in, and it was a Tesla doll. Then all of a sudden, it peaked for me again.
It was like Edison doll.
Or Edison doll, pardon me.
Not a Tesla doll.
An Edison doll, and it peaked for me, and I ratcheted back into it again. And it just seems like, for whatever reason, from that moment on, I flew through it. It was just more chewing it up. And the mystery in the village, which, I don't know, kind of reminded me, shades a little bit of the Torchwood episode Countryside with, not cannibalism in this case, but...
the fact that the humans are doing evil things.
Everybody's in on it.
Yeah.
And, I don't know. I thought it was cool. I really liked it.
I found the Shadow Monster and the Briggs stuff very engaging. I found Arthur's stuff very engaging. I kept stumbling as we got to Thomas and what was going on with him, and trying to keep him straight of between him and Duncan. Which one?
I was a little,
and what was going on there, and what? And finally, I got there. It just took me a little bit to kind of get the hang of who all these people were.
The first couple of transitions,
there's a lot of
back
new
and forth.
people incorporated into the story, and it took a lot to try to keep them track.
Well, especially once Duncan gets lost in the woods too. Then all of a sudden it's like, which one am I? Oh, okay, yeah.
Which I think is to its detriment. Overall, I like this book. I wouldn't heap it on the top of the stack of my favorites, but that to its detriment, it introduced a lot of characters that it does finally kind of wrap up, but it feels like the story goes several different directions until it finally narrows back at the end. And I felt like there was a little too much of Thomas's story for a guy who's going to eat it, or is going to get eaten, I suppose.
And who we don't actually get to see get eaten.
Yeah. And
it kind of gets left.
There's a little too much. There's a relationship developed among the four teens that are looking for Thomas and wanting to leave. But I think they drove in well enough on Duncan's character. But I think the other characters, the story's going really well with developing them together and growing their stories. Only to me feel like it gets very just chopped off at the end. Like there's no resolution for these four other than the unit comes in or the fifth comes in and mops everything up for them and figures it out. So to me that was just a little too abrupt. I kind of wanted to see a little more development with the teens as they were, trying to uncover things. Most obvious is when Scott and his girlfriend, I can't remember her name.
Eileen.
Wasn't Eileen the?
I think so.
Yeah,
Lauren was the other girl.
She was the sister.
Who was
I think so.
Yeah, Eileen was the sister. You're right. Okay, so Scott and Eileen go to the church to investigate, and they see something, and then it's dropped, and then we don't pick that storyline up because later we're told that they saw something, and they show up at the house, and so it was like I wanted more. I wanted these threads that were weaving out to not be so neatly tied up so quickly. I wanted them to maybe merge to get together a little bit more, or trim down the characters that are in the book because there was way too much going on. Well, all of these characters had purpose. The other one was the vicar. Mm-hmm. His character was completely wasted because you've got this vicar who thinks there's a treasure on the property. He's there as a treasure hunter, and while his parish, or not his parish, his office at the church relays enough information for Anne to cobble together some information and put together some clues. His storyline is just he shows up and he's this greedy guy that wants this treasure. Then he goes to look for the treasure. Then he's nowhere to be seeing the rest of the story. So it really had too many character arcs going on for what it needed to be for this book. If you're not going to give me some resolution of these storylines that you've built out, then don't put them in the book. There was a much tidier way to pull this book together.
Well, I think one of those tidier ways is as cool as the light gun was, the darkness creature. Every passage with it, from its perspective, is absolutely confusing, and I could not tell what was going on throughout the entire thing. They needed more definition of what it was doing, what it was looking at. I understood it didn't know what these things were, but as a reader, I need to understand what's happening. Otherwise, I don't care.
Once you give me one passage of it didn't know what was going on, okay, cool. It's totally not necessarily alien, but it's
right.
It's something outside of the experience that cannot be described. I'm with you. I don't need to go back to that now. because everything at every host it jumped into, every hunger, every sleep, it was like, okay,
every small creature, every large creature.
Yeah. I don't know which creatures these are. I can't keep
because it's not. It doesn't have a frame of reference to explain them to me. So it's just a thing with teeth and claws. Okay,
and I almost think that the story would have been better served without the dark
Agreed.
Creature.
They either
and just
needed...
have the fox creatures, whatever they were called,
absolutely,
be the big threat.
100% agree with you.
And them feeding it and this breeding, and they have to try to take them all down because there's so many of them, etc., or take out the parents. Just that whole plot would have been enough to fill the story.
See, the dark is a terrific idea. It's a great.
It needs its own story.
It needs its own story.
Yeah.
It's almost like this villain or bad guy or whatever you want to call it, monster, is piggybacking on this ride the whole way. The story the whole way.
See, I thought they were doing a Bond thing where it's like, oh, this is the cold open. And then the haunting part is that, fine. And I'd have been fine with that, but then they kept re-referencing it and going back to it. And I went, why are we doing this? Because it doesn't seem to be matching up with. Well, okay, I'll see where it goes. But yeah, I agree with you. It didn't.
Yeah.
The characters almost it gave the impression like a Stephen King novel. Stephen King likes big casts. He likes a lot of characters, and he'll spend a couple chapters introducing you to somebody who's going to get eaten. And I kind of felt like that was the goal. That was what they were going for.
And I didn't mind like the old lady and the vet who show up to have that plot of them being killed because it was such a short plot line.
Yeah,
and we had resolution for that plot.
Well, but I wanted that. Okay, go ahead, finish your thought. And I'll readdress that.
The same thing with the kids, that it felt like we were going to get this kind of. They were building them up, and then because we've killed the vet, because we've killed this, they're in danger, they're in mortal peril, they're going to not make it. But then everything gets truncated just because, well, we can only go about 200-300 pages in these books, and then you've got to wrap it up. So it very much, in my mind, felt like something that the author had planned, a much more extensive thing that it probably got lost in editing, just because something had to be sacrificed in order to get it in. I'm not blaming the editor, mind you. I'm just that's what it felt like, is that there were more of those kinds of little inroads that were probably there, or at least planned, and just didn't make it.
To your point, I agree that scene was fine. But the thing is, we invested too much explanation in it by making it this gale force of wind, and suddenly she disappears. And I understand that the author is looking for a reason for misdirection from the villagers as to why she disappeared. However, there was too much mystery built into that I thought that this creature had a power that never was revealed. Yeah, and that was true. The problem with that. If it had just been a dark figure comes in and takes her, and then they explain it away as something else, then I'm okay with that. But it's like a wind that he didn't see, and it blew in it was building too much mystery around how it happened in order to give yourself a reason for the villagers to explain it away that, well, it was a freak of nature. So that the clues
wouldn't match up.
So the clues would match up. That it just that took it too far for me, because then it has me as the reader going, what kind of powers does this thing have? It didn't. It just was really quick.
We needed Anne to be at the scene with the brig investigating and go, well, this was no boating accident. We needed that scene, because that would have truncated all of that and gone, okay, move on. Because once she says something, it's gospel.
My only other complaint about the book, and I can't quite put my finger on what this was and is, so I'm just going to put it there and leave it there, is there's a bit of a disjointed writing style. And by that I mean there's a lot of dissolve scene, what I call dissolve scene action in this, where something will happen and then a lot of things will happen off camera because we've dissolved to another part, just to get rid of having to go through the motions of getting from A to B. And sometimes that works and sometimes that's necessary. But in this book, it felt like we had a lot of times where we were here and then we were here, and then we were explaining what happened from here to here. Yeah. The narrative was explaining it. Somebody wasn't literally giving you an info dump on what happened, but there was times where it felt like there was just too much of this. For the sake of moving the plot along, we have skipped ahead and said, okay, we don't need to explain this. And so while that may have been necessary to keep the story a little more confined, it started to feel disjointed to me because it seemed to skip ahead too often. So that was my only other complaint. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
A case of too many cliffhangers?
Maybe. But not resolved cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Just, okay, and later the next day. That kind of thing. It's just like, well, wait a minute. You can't do that. Overall, though, I mean, the story is enjoyable. It's a fine idea, minus all the things that I had previously mentioned to it. It's a fine idea. The Edison doll, I didn't know anything about those. In fact, I thought that was something that they had made up until I went and researched it. I was like, oh, these were actually a thing. And I really liked the relationship between Anne and the Brig. I thought they had a really great chemistry, and it was really nice to see them working together and getting along under the guise of being outside of what their normal duties are, even down to the point of calling her, wanting him to call her Anne, and even
checking in as my brother.
Even
He'll
calling
get the luggage.
in him as Alistair, and
him bristling against it all.
I felt that eventually they would need to call the Corps in, but I like that they did a lot of the legwork themselves ahead of time, not relying on the Corps, which sometimes I don't know that there's anything that they've gone too far where they felt like the Corps just kind of, I mean, other than some of the short stories we've mentioned that, but I was really afraid that they were going to call the Corps in too early, and I felt like they kind of came in at the right time. Other than it seemed to kind of speedily wrap up, but
like the zombie one, it was like, hurry up, get the Corps here.
Yeah, I really liked Arthur. I thought Arthur Penrose was great. What a wonderful character,
and his chemistry with Alistair was fantastic.
And even with Anne, and in fact, that was the neat thing about this. This was really built really well because you've got a man who feels like he's going mad, who can't decide whether he's actually being haunted by something or if it's real, and that is written really well. His struggle with trying to grasp and deal with what's happening to him is done really well.
Yeah.
And to have Anne and the Brig come in and kind of ground him again and put him into this, okay, no, here are the reasons behind this. This is a scientific reason behind it. To kind of bring him down off of that, settle him down, make him not think he's going mad again, only to turn around and go back that direction at the end of the book. I thought that was well crafted. I thought that was really neat.
I was almost upset because it felt like we get the wonderful stuff with the Brig and Anne, and they get up there, and then Anne feels sidelined for a good chunk of it. That she says, well, go to your room and read. Go have one conversation in the street, and then we're not going to get to you for 5 other chapters because we've got all these characters that we're setting up. And I was almost to the point of thinking, why did you even bother bringing her if you're not going to? But then all of a sudden she came back in and was very instrumental to the way things wrapped up. So it's like, okay. And that
whole end sequence with her and the Brig in the house was fantastic.
It was terrific. I think that I'll keep pointing out the flaws. I'm sorry, guys. The only thing that I don't like about that, and they'll fix this if there are repercussions later, but the only thing I don't like about that is they dealt with her dealing with that in the epilogue.
Right.
I would have liked more of her trying to come to terms with what she had to do and why she had to do it. It's a throwaway conversation between her and Bishop in the epilogue, and I felt I felt cheated by that. However, that being said, if the series deals with that down the line, then that will be a payoff for me, and I will be okay with the way they dealt with it in this book.
Well, and seeing future Anne, knowing she gets to that point where she is more gun savvy and more action oriented down the road.
Well, she's more action oriented. She's not necessarily as gun savvy.
Sure.
or even as I don't know how to say it. Not
as trigger happy.
Yeah, I mean that's not what I'm looking for either. But yeah, no, it's just
science still leads with her.
I think that's just it. I think Anne's always been willing to do what needs to be done, but in this situation, it put her in mind of that may not have been the way that this should have been handled, and and I think that she's right to feel that way, to feel that her actions taken weren't necessarily the best, even if it was a survival instance like that. And I think that doesn't go. I don't think that changes her as a character in the future, even coming in and saving the 2 Brigs in the 2 Brigs, which she does as well. But I think I don't know, I think there needs to be some causality there that she needs to deal with, and I don't think we've connected to Anne in the future yet.
Right, no, I think it's a stepping stone to that direction.
Right.
And I think they will follow that up. And I was a little worried with as we got to that action scene, we wouldn't even get any resolution of or afterthought of what impact this would have on her as a character.
Well, I think that
I'm glad they had something in the epilogue talking about it.
I think the thing that drives it home a little harder, which I appreciated, although it was kind of callous him to say it, is the Briggs saying, well, Miss Travers will make a soldier out of you yet. And I thought, oh, man, how long have you known this woman? That is not the thing you say when she's put in a situation where she has to pick up a firearm and start shooting baby fox man things. I mean, it's just like, that's just, that seemed a little callous to me. And and at the same time, it seemed like something the Brigadier would say. So I suppose maybe it was written well, and it was within the character of the Brig. But I cringed when he said that, because I said, I know her well enough that that's not what's going to set well with her, because that's what you guys have developed, this nice, warm, friendship-like relationship on this adventure, and then you've turned back to type the way that things are going to turn back when they get back to the castle, and it's back to headquarters, and it's going to be, which they're going to have to. That's going to have to happen. I think they have the same relationship they had here in Glenn's Cross as they're going to have, further on.
They could. It would just have to be tempered by this is the working relationship versus this is the.
Yeah, but you know how well that went with Sally. That was a different situation because that was a romantic situation, and this isn't with him and Anne, but it's still echoes of the same thing. So I don't know. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm bashing this book, because I think I even gave it 4 stars on Goodreads, although the more I talk about it, maybe I ought to back that off. But it wasn't a bad book at all. I really enjoyed it. It's just I'm ready to get on to the next story, because this one was just kind of, okay, that was good. Bring on the next one.
I would agree. I didn't have as many issues with it, but you bring up valid points.
Yeah, I hate admitting that. I really hate admitting Glenn is valid.
One other thing that I did like, and this goes back to, I'm kind of in the same boat that you were, Sean. When I started reading this, and I saw the title, and I was like, okay, let's see where they go with this. I hope they don't do what they do. However, by the time we get to the point, what was the little girl's name that was the original sacrifice?
I don't remember now.
When they get to the point where, this is the reason for the dark character. This is the reason for the dark. And it's because she's the light. And she's the light that vanquishes the dark in that situation. And I understand why the author pulled the thread through the whole story in order to get to that point, because that's really the saving grace for Arthur. Because while the Brig and Anne dispatch of the man-fox creature, whatever there's a Gaelic name for it, but I couldn't pronounce it. I just kept looking at it going, I don't know what that is.
I like how it was Anne who kept stumbling over it and couldn't say it right either.
The little girl, her essence or energy or whatever echo of her that was there was basically what vanquished the dark entirely, because she was basically what was the cause of what the gun was basically doing in the beginning of this thing. So there was a nice bookend to that, but I really like the fact that he had to come to terms with the fact that this had happened to her, and he is the one that apologizes to her for it. Yeah. Now, that being said, I wish there had been a little more interconnectivity in the Primrose history. Was it, maybe they left this open unintentionally, or intentionally, was it his ancestors that was there for the first sacrifice? Because it's technically on his land.
That's the impression I got.
And so it had to be
they started this ritual.
It had to be him that apologized to her in order to release her spirit.
Right.
And she's the one that's trying to communicate with him through the doll, because they're the little snippets of, deliver us from evil. Even though it's the Lord's Prayer, I really like the idea that it drilled down to, it would take pieces of it. And obviously I think the call Lethbridge-Stewart didn't come across well enough that whether it was his dad that had left the message,
it doesn't,
or whether it was the doll that had done it. We're led to believe that that's what happened, but then it was also taking pieces of the Lord's Prayer that was reciting, and deliver us from evil was a blatant, fix this situation, help us, release our spirit, or whatever is keeping us. And I kind of wish maybe the book had gone a little further into explaining that, but I also am okay with leaving it, because I think maybe you and I landed in the same place where this was all started by his ancestors, or his at least his.
That's definitely the impression I got.
Yeah, his family. And so it was down to him to release this curse.
Well, it was the building of the manor on the intersecting.
Right, and I think the ley
lines
lines, but I think part of that was to explain away the reason why her energy was trapped there.
That's the scientific.
Right, and what brought the creature there to continue to feed there. Right. It also lent to the idea of why you had townsfolk that were still adhering to this legend that you're supposed to
in the
sacrifice
1960s or 70s.
One of the key, that was a little hard to swallow. But I think the ley line theory of the energy and the legend and the lore and the superstition that kind of lent some credibility to it for me. So I actually was okay with the ley line idea.
Not in small towns. I totally bought that. The spiritual energy is where I have to fall back on it some and go, well, now we're back into the more mystical, supernatural elements versus the
did go there.
Scientific.
It does go there in this book.
So. I liked the light gun a lot better, but
there was some great Captain Miles action going on.
Yeah,
he turned out to be a pretty all right little character.
You got a solo venture there.
Yeah, and a troop to lead and everything.
Well, I felt kind of guilty being my namesake being in most of the books, so I was glad to step aside.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
You don't argue with Sean Miles.
I thought for sure one of you guys was going to say you didn't like it because Major Bartlett wasn't in the book. I was waiting for the defense. Okay, I appreciate that. Anything else?
I know what Major Bartlett's up to.
Anything else that you guys want to? I feel like I've dominated this conversation. It goes back to
very valid point.
It goes back to months ago where I said every time I come to a thing, I think I'm not going to say much because I don't have a lot good to say, and then I start pointing out all the problems I have, but I don't want it to make it sound like I think people should read this book. It's another fine entry in the Lethbridge-Stewart story. It is enjoyable. It has a lot of bright spots, which I hope I pointed out enough of those as well, but it was good. It was a good book. All right. Well, so what do we got coming up on the schedule?
Coming up on the schedule for next week, we're going to dip our toe back into the Big Finish waters with story number 96, Valhalla, which is a 7th Doctor audio, and the Titan Comics miniseries Ghost Stories. I know Glenn is so excited.
You keep saying that, but I've already said that.
It's because he is.
I'm okay with this. Yeah, I'm okay with it.
He told me earlier I put up the ghost image on our Facebook banner, and he was so excited to see it there.
I was excited. I think I said this a couple weeks ago, and then I got shut down by Keith, who said, "Well, wait until you review it." But I think it's okay as a comic book because it's a comic book character. But when it's in the world of Doctor Who, it just didn't. I don't know. We'll talk about it.
We'll talk about it.
I'm shutting myself down this week.
We'll see how we feel.
We're going to get there. We'll see how we feel.
And then the following week is our discussion on Whobots. So you still have time to get your feedback in and let us know what robots in the universe of Doctor Who are your favorites and why. And we'll be talking about arts and.
Oh, so that's the approach we're going with it?
No, but we'll be talking about it. Basically, I'm looking for any excuse not to talk about Quarks. So,
good luck with that.
So robots is 2 weeks from now.
2 weeks from now.
All right.
2 weeks from now.
I've still got to chart some more graphs.
2 weeks.
If you want to send us some feedback about robots, you can do that by going to our website, travelingthevortex.com, and fill out the Send Us Feedback tab, or reach out to us on any form of social media.
Very good. Anything else we need to touch on this week? All right, that's going to do it. Until next week, I'm Glenn.
I'm Sean.
I'm Keith.
Cheers.
Good night, everybody.
Be seeing you.
Thanks for listening.
You have been listening to Traveling the Vortex. Doctor Who and all of its associated programs are owned and trademarked by the BBC. No infringement is intended or implied.